Hi, hello, good afternoon everyone. I'm Dr. Harika Kishore. On behalf of Vista's Learning, I'm here as your biology educator and I would like to welcome you all for the present session. vlearning, it's an online education platform which works with an ideology of providing quality education for all. Visit our website www.v-learning.in where you're going to get an access for all the live classes, recorded sessions, study materials and also concept videos. Moreover, you're going to get this lecture notes in the form of PDFs. Get your acquaintance with all the channels available and make sure to subscribe to the channel Vista's Learning Class 11 and 12. If you find this session useful and informative, don't forget to click on the like and share this session with your friends. And also click on the bell icon such that you're going to get all the upcoming video notifications. Now, let's start our session. In continuation with the previous session where we have been studying about the chapter ecosystem, right? Which comes under the unit ecology. Now, so, in last class, we have been discussing, we are in the process of understanding what are the structural components of the ecosystem and what are all the functional components of the ecosystem. So, coming to the structural components of ecosystem, they are both biotic components and abiotic components. And we are also discussed about the list of the functions that are performed by the ecosystem as a unit, like productivity, decomposition and nutrient cycling as well as flow of the energy, what we call it as the energy flow, right? So, here functional components of ecosystem. Coming to the functional components of the ecosystem, where productivity, right? Decomposition, nutrient cycling and finally that is energy flow of energy. How the flow of energy takes place from one trophic level to another trophic level, right? So, in previous session, we have discussed about the productivity. Like we have also discussed about the primary productivity and secondary productivity. Under primary productivity, we discussed about gross primary productivity, net primary productivity. Now, in this class, let's focus on decomposition. So, we know that decomposition is very, very important. If the decomposers are not present, then the earth would be full of all the detritus matter. So, it is very, very important for the presence of the decomposers and to perform the decomposition such that we can clean the earth surface and also we can convert the inorganic, we can produce the inorganic matter such that the soil is becoming more humerus, that means fertile for the growth of the producers, what we call it as the plants. Let's discuss more about decomposition. So here, if you talk about decomposition, immediately we got to know about earthworms, which is very famously considered as a farmer's friends because they are involved in the decomposition and also loosening of the soil. That means it will increase the porous nature of the soil. So here we may have heard of the earthworms being referred to as a farmer's friends because these earthworms are here. This is so because they help in breakdown of complex organic matter as well as loosening of the soil. That means it is involved in increasing soil porous nature. So here the earthworms are considered as a farmers' friends because they help in the breakdown of the complex organic matter and convert into simpler inorganic matter which can be readily absorbed by the root system of the plants such that the growth of the plants are possibly done. And it is also involved in loosening of the soil, thereby increasing the porosity of the soil. Thereby, the penetration of the root system becomes easier. Now, here, similarly, decomposers break down complex organic matter into simpler inorganic substances, which includes carbon dioxide, water and nutrients. Here the decomposers, what they will do, they will break down more complex organic matters into simpler inorganic forms like carbon dioxide, water and nutrients such that it is useful to increase the nutritive nature of the soil. And this process is called as decomposition. But the process of the decomposition consisting of many processes, sub-processes together which performs to finally leads to the complete decomposition process. Now, the dead plant remains as a dry leaves, dry flowers, dry other part of the plants like leaves, bark, flowers and dead remains of animals, which includes fecal matter too, constitute detritus. And this detritus is the raw material for decomposition. This is very, very important. Detritus is a main raw material for decomposition. What is this detritus? Detritus is comprised of dried leaves, barks, flower and the dead remains of the animal, which also includes fecal matter. All this together composites for detritus, and this detritus is the raw material for the decomposition. Now, so here, as we already said, the decomposition includes so many steps. Here, important steps in the process of decomposition. First one, fragmentation. After that, leaching and catabolism. All these three steps occurs simultaneously, parallelly, and after that humidification and mineralization, which happens inside the soil. So all these steps are very, very important in the process of decomposition. This is very important, where the process of decomposition includes so many steps, and the 5 steps which are involved in the decomposition are fragmentation, leaching, catabolism and humidification and mineralization. So here, out of these 5 processes, the starting 3 steps occurs simultaneously, which leads to the remaining 2 steps, and they are, one second, yes, humidification and mineralization. Right, now let's discuss about all these steps one by one. First step is fragmentation, which is very easy to understand, where fragmentation is nothing but breakdown of detritus into smaller particles. The detritus is breakdown to give rise to smaller particles, and this is called as fragmentation. This is very, very simple. And here, Detritivores, for example, earthworms, break down all the detritus into smaller particles, and this process is called as fragmentation. Now, by the process of leaching, the second step, this is second step and this is first step. Primarily, in the fragmentation, the complex detritus is break down into simple particles, and that breaking down of the detritus into simple particles is called as fragmentation. Now, after fragmentation, that means it moves on parallelly, simultaneously, leaching process happens. What is this? Here, water soluble inorganic nutrients goes down into the soil horizon. Let us consider these are the soil horizons. Now, the water soluble inorganic nutrients starts moving down and get accumulated into soil horizons. So here nutrients go down deeper into the soil horizon and get precipitated as a unavailable salts. This process is called as leaching, and where here the bacterial as well as fungal enzymes degrade the detritus into simple inorganic substances. Initially only we discussed that the decomposition is nothing but the breakdown of the complex organic molecules, complex organic substances into simple inorganic substances. So here bacterial and fungal enzyme will work on the detritus, which leads to the degradation of the detritus into simple inorganic substances. Catabolism is nothing but breakdown of the complex molecules into simple substances. Breakdown of the complex substances into simple substances. Here also the complex organic substances are breakdown into simple inorganic substances, and that the process what we are calling it as a catabolism, which is an opposite to the anabolism. Anabolism is a constructive process. Catabolism is a destructive process where it leads to the breakdown of the complex molecules into simple molecules, right? So now here, as we already mentioned, it is important to note that all the above steps, what are all the above steps? First, fragmentation, right? Second, leaching. Right? And third, catabolism. All these three steps in the decomposition operates simultaneously on the raw material of the decomposition, that is detritus. We already know detritus is a raw material. Right? So, after that, two steps. What are they? Humification and mineralization. Let's understand. So, here, humification and mineralization. So, this is fourth step and this is fifth one. Occurs during decomposition in the soil. It happens in the soil. Now, humification leads to accumulation of a dark color amorphous substances, and that we call as a humus. Very, very important. Humification in the name itself. So, humification leads to the accumulation of the humus. What do you mean by this humus? It is a dark color amorphous substances that is highly resistant towards microbial action. This is very, very important. Humus is highly resistant towards microbial action and undergoes decomposition at a very extremely slow rates, because it is resistant towards the microbial activity, and we know that microbes act as the decomposers. As this is resistant towards the microbial activity, the decomposition of this humus takes extremely slow rates, Now, moving on to, and also being this humus colloidal in nature, this humus also serves as a reservoir of nutrients, because it is not easily gets decomposed at a very faster rates. It takes its own time, extremely slower rates. Therefore, this humus will act as a reservoir of the nutrients. Moving on to this humus is further degraded by some microbes and releases inorganic nutrients. It happens at very, very slow rates because it is resistance. It gets degraded by the microbes at very extremely slow rates. If that happens, it leads to release of the inorganic nutrients, and that process is called as mineralization. See, it is acting as a reservoir of the nutrients, right? And it will release the inorganic nutrients. That release is nothing but mineralization. So, this is all about the steps which are involved in the process of decomposition, starting with fragmentation, leaching, and the third step, that is catabolism, and also humidification, and finally release of the inorganic nutrients, that is called as mineralization. Now, so here, the conditions which favors and which will not favor the process of decomposition, let's discuss. Decomposition largely requires the presence of oxygen. Largely an oxygen requiring process. It requires the presence of oxygen. Right? Now, the rate of the decomposition is greatly controlled by chemical composition of the detritus. So here the rate of decomposition depends on 1. Composition of detritus, temperature, soil moisture, which comes under climatic factors. So, we are in the process of understanding what are the conditions that are going to regulate, control the process of decomposition. The rate of decomposition is determined, is under the control of these factors. What are they? One is the chemical composition of the detritus, because detritus is the raw material for the decomposition. Now, the second one is climatic factors, which includes temperature and also soil moisture content of the soil. So, because the humidification and mineralization happens in the soil. Therefore, the moisture contents of the soil is going to greatly influence the process of decomposition. So now, the rate of the decomposition is controlled by, one is the chemical composition of the detritus and other one is climatic factor. That climatic factors are nothing but temperature and soil moisture. So here, this is an image that has been directly taken from your NCERT textbook, which gives an overall representation of this decomposition. Here is a plant, tree, right? Now, the tree is growing in the soil. And here, green leaves which are falling on the ground. Once the green leaves falls on the ground, it may be taken up by the microbes, insects, birds, right, or what we call as the herbivores. So here, some are eaten by insects or other animals, and also nutrients will enter into food web. Nutrients will enter into food chain or food web. Right? Now, some of the leaves are eaten up are consumed by the herbivores, right? And that herbivores may be insects, birds, animals. So here, some nutrients leaching process just now we have discussed, right? So here, leaches into soil by chemical reactions. That means with the help of the microbial enzymes. Now, it may be, as this process is taking place, that means leaching is taking place, it is going to add up to the organic nutrients that are present in the soil and makes the soil organic rich, because all the organic matter has been accumulated into the soil. And sometimes again leaves partially consumed by the decomposers. Here is all about the insects, birds, which feeds on it. It may undergo the process of decomposition by the presence of decomposers. What do you mean by this decomposers? Like microbes, bacteria, fungi, and they may lose form and become litter. That means humus, which again is useful for further decomposition by the earthworms, bacteria, soil mitts, and fungi, which adds to the organic rich soil. Now, this organic rich soil is ready to be acted as a perfect substrate for the growth of the plants. This is how the decomposition picture appears in the terrestrial ecosystem. Now, so here, in a particular climatic condition, where just now we have discussed about what are the factors that are going to control, regulate the process of decomposition, right? They are climatic factors. Under a particular climatic factors, decomposition rate is slower. Slower if the detritus is rich in substances like lignin and chitin. These substances slow down the process of decomposition. That is, the rate of the decomposition slows if the detritus consisting of lignin and chitin. Whereas if the detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble sugars, then the decomposition occurs at a very faster rates. So here, and quicker if the detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble substances like sugars. Here the thing is, this point will give you an information about how the composition of the detritus is going to control its rate of the decomposition. Here, the fast decomposition happens if the detritus consists of consists of nitrogen and sugars. And the decomposition is slow if the detritus consists of lignin and chitin. Simple. So, the composition of the detritus is going to show its effect on the rate of the decomposition. The rate of the decomposition is very faster if the detritus is composed of a soluble substances like sugars and it consists of nitrogen. If the detritus is consisting of the substances like lignin and chitin, the decomposition is going to happen at a very extremely slow rate. That is it. Now, moving on to climatic factors, like as we already mentioned, the climatic factors which are going to influence your rate of decomposition are two. One is temperature and other one is soil moisture. Are the most important climatic factors that regulate the rate of the decomposition through their effect on activity of soil microbes. Simple. Here, the decomposition happens in the presence of the decomposers. Decomposers are nothing but the soil microbes. Therefore, the soil moisture is definitely going show its effect, is going to control the rate of the decomposition. Now, so here, moving on to temperature, one of the climatic factor which is going to show its effect on the rate of the decomposition. Warm, moist environment favors the decomposition, whereas very low temperatures and also anaerobiosis. Anaerobiosis means the absence of oxygen. Absence of oxygen. See, initially we have mentioned one point like decomposition is a process which requires the presence of oxygen. If the oxygen is lacking, if there is no availability of the oxygen, definitely it inhibits decomposition, resulting in building up of organic material because it is not converting into simpler inorganic materials. So therefore it leads to the piling up of or building up of organic materials. So this is all about temperature. Here, warm and moist environment favors the process of decomposition, whereas very low temperature as well as absence of oxygen conditions are going to lead to inhibits the decomposition process. Now, so moving on to energy flow. See, we have been discussing about the functional components of the ecosystem. We have discussed about the productivity. We have discussed about the decomposition. Let's understand energy flow. How the energy flows from one trophic level to another trophic level. We already know sun is the ultimate source of energy, right? Radiant energy. So that radiant energy is fixed by the photosynthesis by plants, what we call it as a producers. So sun is the only source of energy for all the ecosystem on earth. That means terrestrial ecosystem. What about the aquatic ecosystem, where there is no very deep bottom layers of the ocean, where we don't get any light energy? There the energy is coming from thermal energy, heat. So here, of the incident solar radiation, less than 50%. It's not 100% whatever the energy which is what we get from the sun, which is reaching to the earth, is going to convert into it is going to fixed by the plants. It is only 50% of the total energy, that is photosynthetically active radiation, what we call it as a PAR, photosynthetically active radiation. Only 50% supports. So here we know that plants, the photosynthetic bacteria, as well as what we call it as the photosynthetic bacteria are nothing but autotrophs, right? Which can produce their own food materials. That is what we are calling as a auto. By performing the photosynthesis, the plants as well as some of the photosynthetic bacteria uses this PAR. What do you mean by PAR? Photosynthetically active radiation. Fixes sun's radiant energy to make food from simple inorganic materials, right? And here another thing, plants captures only, this is also very very important, 2 to 10%, 2 to 10% of total PAR, that is photosynthetically active radiation, and this small amount of the energy sustains the entire living world. See, out of the total sun energy, we are getting 50% of the photosynthetically active radiation. Out of this photosynthetically active radiation, the plants can fix only up to 2 to 10%, and this is enough to sustain the entire life which is existing on the world. Now, it is very important to know how the solar energy captured by plants flows through different organisms of an ecosystem. Yeah, once the photosynthesis, sun is an ultimate source of energy. Right? Where right? So here is a plant which performs photosynthesis. So it is capturing, right? And that is only 2 to 10% of photosynthetically active radiant energy, photosynthetically active radiation. Now, it is, as this is producer, it is consumed by another level, what we call as the herbivores. Right? Now, this herbivores will further move on to the carnivores. So, this is how happens. Now, let's understand how the flow. This is nothing but the flow of the energy. The energy what has been trapped by the plant system move to the next trophic level, from that to another trophic level. This is what we call it as an energy flow. Now, here, all organisms are dependent on the food on producers. Producers are nothing but plants, either directly or indirectly, because the herbivores will consume the plants as their food. Now, this herbivores has been taken as a food to another level, what we call it as a carnivores. So here, the carnivores is indirectly getting the food from the plant system, whereas the herbivores are getting directly food by the plant system. So that is what the producers are, the ultimate source of food for the next level of trophic systems that are present in the ecosystem, whether it is directly happening or indirectly happening. So you find unidirectional flow of energy. Energy from the sun is get deposited on the producers by the producers. That means it performs the photosynthesis and fixes the energy. Now, this energy moves on to the next and next. So, this is a unidirectional flow of the energy from the sun to the producers, that means plants, and then to the consumers. So, consumers may be like primary consumers, secondary consumers, or tertiary consumers, like what we call it as herbivores, and primary carnivores, secondary carnivores. All this can be called as a consumers. They need a constant supply of energy to synthesize the molecules that are required and to counteract the universal tendency towards the increasing disorderliness. So all this supply of the energy is ultimately coming from the sun, and it is being fixed by the producers, and it is transferred to the next level through herbivores and primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. So, let's understand. The green plants in the ecosystem are the producers. Yes, if it is in the terrestrial ecosystem, the major producers are herbaceous, woody plants, plants only producers. That if we consider the terrestrial ecosystem. Not only terrestrial ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem are also there. So, likewise, the producers in aquatic ecosystem are various species like phytoplanktons, algae, and higher plant system. So, the producers are the woody plants and herbaceous plants when it comes to the terrestrial ecosystem. If it comes to the aquatic ecosystem, then what are all the producers? They are algae, phytoplanktons, and higher plant systems. Now, we have read about food chains and also food webs that exist in the nature, right? It may be in the terrestrial ecosystem or aquatic ecosystem. We do find the presence of this chains and webs. Starting from plants, that means producers, food chain or rather webs are formed such that an animal feeds on the plant. So here, animal will feed on the plant. So here, this is a producer and this is a consumer. This will feed on it. So here, and this animal is consumed by another animal. Look at here, formed such that an animal feeds on the plant, an animal feeds on the plant, and another animal is in turn is food for another. So this is in turn food for another animal. This chain or web is formed because of interdependency, because each and every living system, this animal is depending upon the plant system and another animal will depend upon this animal. So each and every living organism is depending upon on the lower trophic level. Therefore, we can say because of this interdependency, there is a formation of food chains and food webs. Now, so here, no energy that is trapped into an organism remains in it forever. For example, we know that the plants will act as a producers and trap the sun energy, that is solar energy, and produces the food. Therefore, the solar energy has been trapped in the form of the food by the plants by performing photosynthesis. That is okay. Now here, the energy of what has been trapped by the plant system will never remain as such. It may be consumed by the next trophic level organism, or for instance, if it is not eaten up, if it is not consumed by another organism, this plant will grow and finally it has to reach its aging, that is senescence, and again it has to taken up by the decomposers. That means it has to loss. So therefore, never the energy remains forever. It has to transfer, it has to flow. That is what we are telling it as an energy flow. The energy trapped by the producers, that means plants, hence is either passed on to the consumers, another trophic level consumer, or the organism dies. It reaches to the senescence. Death of the organism is the beginning of the decomposition, is the beginning of the detritus food chain. We know that detritus is a raw material for the decomposition process and it will leads to the decomposition food chain. Decomposition food chain, that we call it as a detritus food chain or detritus food web. Right? Now, all animals depends on the plants directly or indirectly for their food needs. That is obvious thing. They are hence called consumers. No matter what are they, like they may be herbivores or carnivores, all we can together can be named as a consumers because it is consuming the energy which is present in the plant system directly or indirectly. So therefore, hence we are calling them as a consumers and also heterotrophs. They are not autotrophs, they are heterotrophs, because auto means those organisms which can synthesize their own food materials. If the food is coming from the other animal, that we call it as an heterotrophs. Now, if they feed on producers, the plants, they are called primary consumers. Whatever the animals which feeds on the plants, that is producers, we call it as a primary consumers. And if the animals eats other animal which in turn eats the plants, are they produce, means plants are plant products, then they are called as primary consumers. Simply, the primary consumers will feed on the secondary consumer will feed on the primary consumer. Primary consumers will feed on the producers. Now, otherwise, they could have tertiary consumers too. Therefore, producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and so on. Obviously, the primary consumers will be herbivores, which feeds on the plant system. Some common herbivores are insects, birds, mammals in terrestrial ecosystem, and arthropods, molluscas in aquatic ecosystem. These are all herbivores. Now, producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, right? So here herbivores, primary carnivores, secondary carnivores. So here, the consumers that feeds on these herbivores, the consumers which are feeding on the herbivores are carnivores. Or more correctly speaking, they are primary carnivores. They are primary carnivores. So, the secondary consumers, otherwise called as, appropriately we can call it as a primary carnivores. These primary carnivores are nothing but they consume from the herbivores, which are considered as a primary consumers. Now, these animals that depends on the primary carnivores. What are primary carnivores? Primary carnivores are nothing but tertiary consumers. They are labeled as secondary carnivores. They are labeled as secondary carnivores, right? So this is how the chain continues. Food chain continues and the flow of the energy takes place from one trophic level to another trophic level. Producers are nothing but plants. On the plants, herbivores feeds. Right? Herbivores consumes the plants and therefore we are calling it as the primary consumers. And those organisms which are feeding on the herbivores, we call it as a primary carnivores or secondary consumers. Now, the plants which feeds on this primary carnivores are nothing but secondary carnivores or tertiary consumers. So, all this together we can call it as a consumers. Consumers consumes their food on depending upon directly or indirectly on the producers. Now, so here as we already said that the energy flows in such a way that it will be either detritus food chain or grazing food chain. Grazing food chain or detritus food chain. Okay. So this is a simple flow where we can see grass, plants. It is a producer, right? It is a producer. Now the energy which has been fixed is transferred to a next trophic level, that is primary consumer, that is goat in this case. And this goat is eaten up by the secondary consumer, that is man. So we can also say it as a producer, herbivore, primary carnivore. So this is how we have discussed about, the process of decomposition, which consisting of totally 5 steps, right? We discussed about all the 5 steps which are involved in the process of decomposition, and also we discussed about the energy flow. Let's continue with this energy flow in the coming up session 2. Until then, keep learning with vlearning.